Blood ran down the saloon steps as Bethany Owens watched in horror. Her father, once the proud owner of Oro Blanco's most respectable establishment, now lay motionless on the wooden boardwalk, his gambling debts paid in the only currency he had left his daughter's freedom. The year was 1876, and in the harsh Arizona territory, a man's word was his bond, even when that word sold his only child to the notorious Rattlesnake Gang. "Consider your debts settled, Owens," said Victor Kane, the gang's leader, his voice colder than the metal of the gun he'd just used to execute her father. His weathered face, scarred from years of lawlessness, turned toward Bethany. "You fetch a high price, girl, higher than your daddy was worth." Bethany, 20 years old and trembling in her calico dress, tried to run, but Kane's men caught her before she made it 3 steps. She'd known her father had gambling problems, but never imagined he'd wager her away to men whose reputation stretched from Tucson to Santa Fe, men who left nothing but death and misery in their wake. "Please," she begged, her blue eyes swimming with tears. "I'm not property to be traded." Kane laughed, the sound echoing through the street as townsfolk looked away, afraid to challenge the gang that had terrorized Oro Blanco for months. "Everything has a price in this world, Miss Owens. Your father just learned that lesson too late." As they bound her wrists and hoisted her onto Kane's horse, Bethany caught sight of a young man watching from the shadows of the livery stable. Zachary Jackson, her father's stable hand, locked eyes with her for just a moment. In that silent exchange, she saw rage, determination, and a promise. They rode out of town before sundown. Bethany jostled painfully against Kane's back as they headed toward the gang's hideout in the Dragoon Mountains. Behind them, the news of what had happened spread through Oro Blanco like wildfire, eventually reaching the small cabin at the edge of town where Zach lived. Zach paced the worn floorboards of his cabin, his mind racing. At 25, he'd seen his share of injustice on the frontier, but nothing had ever cut him as deeply as watching Bethany being taken. She wasn't just his employer's daughter over the past year. They'd formed a friendship that had begun to blossom into something more, something neither had dared name yet. "I should have stopped them," he muttered, slamming his fist against the rough-hewn wall. "Should have done something." But what could one man do against Kane and his dozen outlaws? Going to the sheriff was pointless. The man was as useful as a rattlesnake in a sleeping bag, probably taking payoffs from the gang anyway. Zach grabbed his Winchester rifle from above the fireplace and checked the ammunition. He'd need more than bullets to get Bethany back, though. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. "Jackson," a voice called from outside, followed by urgent knocking. "Open up, son." Zach opened the door to find Thomas Miller, the town blacksmith and one of the few men in Oro Blanco with a backbone. "I saw what happened," Miller said grimly. "What are you planning to do about it?" "Get her back or die trying," Zach replied, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. Miller nodded. "Kane's taken at least 3 women from towns across the territory. They use them as leverage, ransom, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Their hideouts in Rustler's Canyon, about 40 miles east in the Dragoons." "How do you know that?" "My brother's a deputy in Bisbee. They've been tracking the gang for months but can't get enough men together for a raid." Zach strapped on his gun belt. "I don't need a raid. I need darkness, surprise, and a damn good horse." "You're talking suicide, boy," Miller warned. "Kane has at least 12 men with him." 13 men won't matter if they don't see me coming," Zach replied, checking his Colt revolver. "I worked as a scout for the cavalry before coming here. I know how to move unseen." Miller hesitated, then sighed. "Wait here." He returned minutes later with a small leather pouch. "Sleeping powder, mix it with their whiskey if you get the chance, and take this." He handed Zach a double-barreled shotgun. "My father's. It's killed better men than Victor Kane." Zach packed quickly ammunition, jerky, water, a length of rope, and the sleeping powder. His Palomino stallion, Thunder, was the fastest horse in the county. possibly the only chance he had of catching up to the gang before they disappeared into their mountain stronghold. As dusk settled over Oro Blanco, Zach mounted Thunder and looked back at the town. "If I'm not back in 3 days," he told Miller, "tell the marshal in Tucson what happened, get him to send men." Miller nodded grimly. "Godspeed, Jackson." Zach spurred Thunder forward, heading east into the gathering darkness. The first stars appeared overhead as the desert cooled. He'd need to ride through the night to have any chance of reaching the canyon by morning, when the gang would likely be sleeping off whatever celebration they had planned. The thought of what that celebration might entail made his blood run cold. The Rattlesnake Gang rode hard for hours, stopping only when the mountains loomed dark against the night sky. They made camp in a small clearing surrounded by mesquite and palavered trees, the perfect natural corral for their horses. Bethany sat bound against a boulder, her wrists raw from the rope. She'd stopped crying hours ago, replacing tears with the hard determination to survive. Her father might have been a fool, but he'd raised no weakling. Water. A canteen appeared before her, held by the youngest gang member, a boy barely older than she was. She drank gratefully, studying the camp. 8 men that she could count, plus Kane. Where were the others? Standing guard, perhaps, or sent ahead to prepare their hideout? "What's your name?" she asked the young outlaw. He glanced nervously at Kane, who sat by the fire cleaning his revolver. "Eddie," he whispered. "Eddie Meeks." "Why do you ride with them, Eddie?" The boy looked away. "Ain't got nowhere else. Kane found me orphaned after Apaches raided our homestead." "Been with him 3 years now." Kane's voice cut through their conversation. "Meeks, stop fraternizing with the merchandise and get the horses watered." Eddie scurried away, and Kane approached Bethany, crouching to meet her eyes. "Don't waste your time trying to turn my men against me, girl. They're loyal because they know what happens to traitors." "What are you planning to do with me?" Bethany asked, forcing strength into her voice. Kane smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "That depends on how cooperative you are. I've got a buyer in Sonora who pays handsomely for American girls, but I might keep you around if you prove useful." Bethany felt sick, but kept her expression neutral. "My father wasn't worth much, but I guarantee I'm worth even less. Nobody will pay for me." "Your father was a fool who thought he could out-cheat a cheater," Kane replied, amusement in his cold eyes. "But you've got spirit. That's worth something south of the border." As Kane walked away, Bethany noticed something. He'd dropped a small, folding knife, probably fallen from his pocket when he crouched. When no one was looking, she managed to drag it closer with her foot, eventually concealing it beneath her skirt. It wasn't much, but it was something. Miles behind them, Zach pushed Thunder to the limit, following their trail by moonlight. The stallion's powerful strides ate up the distance, but Zach knew they were still hours behind. Every minute that passed was another minute Bethany remained in danger. The trail led through a narrow pass, then down into a valley dotted with saguaro cacti standing like sentinels in the moonlight. Zach knew this country well. They were heading exactly where Miller had said, toward Rustler's Canyon. As the first pink light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Zach spotted smoke rising from a clearing about half a mile ahead. He dismounted, secured Thunder to a mesquite tree, and proceeded on foot, moving silently through the desert brush. The gang was breaking camp, loading their gear onto horses. Bethany sat on the ground, still bound but alert, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings. Zach felt a surge of pride at her resilience. He counted quickly. 9 men, including Kane. That meant at least 3 others were unaccounted for, likely already at the hideout. Too many to take on directly. He'd need to follow them to the canyon and wait for his moment. For hours, Zach shadowed the gang, keeping to high ground and moving parallel to their path. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. By mid-afternoon, they reached the mouth of Rustler's Canyon, a jagged split in the Dragoon Mountains that seemed to swallow them whole. Zach circled wide, climbing a ridge that overlooked the canyon. From this vantage point, He could see the hideout, a collection of crude wooden structures built into a natural cave system halfway up the opposite wall. Perfect for defense, nearly impossible to approach unseen. He watched through his field glass as they arrived, dragging Bethany from her horse and marching her into the largest structure. His jaw clenched when Cain followed her inside, closing the door behind them. Night couldn't come soon enough. Inside the gang's hideout, Bethany found herself in a surprisingly well-furnished room. A real bed with blankets, a washstand with clean water, even a small mirror on the wall. The relative luxury only increased her apprehension. "Get cleaned up," Cain ordered, cutting her bonds. "There's a dress in that chest. Put it on." "Why?" Bethany rubbed her wrists, eyeing the distance to the door. Cain stood between her and freedom, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. "Because I said so," he replied simply. "And because we're having company tonight. A potential buyer wants to see the merchandise before committing." Bethany's stomach turned. "I'm not for sale," Cain laughed. "Everything's for sale, girl. Your daddy taught you that lesson with his last breath." He moved to the door. "You've got 1 hour. Try anything foolish, and you'll wish I'd shot you back in town." When Cain left, Bethany immediately searched the room for weapons or escape routes. The window was small but unbarred, possibly large enough to squeeze through, but the drop to the canyon floor looked fatal. The knife she'd managed to hide was small, but it was something. She washed quickly and opened the chest. Inside was a beautiful green dress, finer than anything she'd owned in Oro Blanco. The message was clear. She was being dressed up for display. Bethany put on the dress, concealing the knife in a fold of fabric. Then she sat on the bed and waited, trying to still her racing heart. If someone was coming to inspect her tonight, that meant she had only hours to escape or for rescue to arrive. As darkness fell, Zach made his move. He'd spent the afternoon observing the hideout, noting guard rotations and identifying the best approach. 2 men guarded the narrow path leading up to the cave entrance, while another patrolled the ridge above. The rest were inside, visible occasionally through windows glowing with lamplight. Zach crept down from his position, moving from shadow to shadow until he reached the base of the cliff. The path up was exposed, impossible to climb without being seen by the guards. He needed a distraction. Reaching into his saddlebag, he pulled out a bundle of dynamite he'd taken from Miller's blacksmith shop. It wasn't much, but placed correctly, it would create the chaos he needed. He circled around to a spot about 100 yards from the path, where a cluster of boulders created a natural echo chamber. He placed the dynamite, set a 5-minute fuse, and retreated to a position closer to the path. When the explosion came, it was more effective than he'd hoped. The sound bounced off the canyon walls, creating the impression of multiple blasts. The guards on the path immediately ran toward the noise, guns drawn. Zach seized his opportunity, sprinting up the path and flattening himself against the rock face beside the cave entrance. Inside, he could hear men shouting, boots stomping as they prepared to investigate the explosion. 4 men rushed out, Cain among them. "Meeks, you stay with the girl," he ordered. "The rest of you spread out and find whoever's out there. Might be lawmen, might be Apaches. Don't take chances." As they disappeared down the path, Zach slipped inside, finding himself in a large central cavern. 3 doors led off at one had to contain Bethany. "Who's there?" a young voice called, nervous and high. The boy Meeks emerged from one of the doors, revolver drawn but shaking visibly. Zach stepped from the shadows, his own gun trained on the boy. "Where is she?" Eddie's eyes widened with fear. "You're from Oro Blanco, ain't you? Come for the girl." "Put down the gun, son," Zach said calmly. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." Eddie hesitated, then lowered his weapon. "In there," he nodded toward the door he'd just exited. "Cain's gonna sell her to a Mexican gang lord coming tonight. She doesn't deserve that." "Why are you helping me?" Zach asked, still cautious. "Because I've seen what happens to the others," Eddie replied, his voice dropping. "Just take her and go. I'll tell him you got the drop on me." Zach nodded, moving toward the door. "Get out of this life, kid, before it's too late." Inside the room, Bethany had heard the explosion and the subsequent commotion. She stood by the window, the small knife clutched in her hand, ready to fight if necessary. When the door opened, she whirled around, knife raised, and nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of Zach. "You came," she whispered, rushing into his arms. Zach held her briefly, then pulled back. "We don't have much time. Kane and the others will be back soon." They hurried into the main cavern where Eddie still stood nervously. "The back way," he said, pointing to a narrow passage. "It leads down to the canyon floor. Steeper, but they won't be watching it." "Come with us," Bethany urged the young outlaw. Eddie shook his head. "Can't, Kane would hunt me down, just go." They didn't argue further, slipping into the passage as shouts echoed from outside. The path was treacherous, barely visible in the darkness, but Zach led the way confidently, one hand holding Bethany's, the other keeping his balance against the rough stone wall. They were halfway down when gunfire erupted above them. "They've discovered you're gone," Zach said grimly. "We need to move faster." They scrambled down the remaining distance, emerging at the base of the cliff just as lanterns appeared along the path above. Zach pulled Bethany into the cover of a large boulder. "Thunder is hidden about a quarter-mile south," he whispered. "If we can reach him, we have a chance." More gunfire rang out, bullets ricocheting off rocks nearby. "They're shooting blind," Zach said. "Stay low and follow me." They ran from cover to cover, the shouts and gunfire growing more distant as they put distance between themselves and the hideout. Finally, they reached the mesquite thicket where Thunder waited, pawing nervously at the ground. "Up you go," Zach said, helping Bethany onto the stallion before mounting behind her. "Hold tight." He spurred Thunder forward, and the horse responded instantly, galloping through the darkness. Behind them, lanterns bobbed like fireflies as Kane's men spread out to search. "They'll track us at first light," Bethany said, her voice steady despite everything she'd endured. "By then, we'll be long gone," Zach assured her. "Thunder can outrun anything they've got." They rode hard through the night, Zach keeping to dry creek beds and rocky ground to minimize their trail. As dawn approached, they stopped briefly to rest the horse and drink from Zach's canteen. "How did you find me?" Bethany asked, studying his face in the faint pre-dawn light. "Miller knew where Kane's hideout was," Zach replied. "I just followed their trail and waited for the right moment." "You risked everything," she said softly. "Why?" Zach met her eyes. "Because some things are worth risking everything for." Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Zach stiffened, listening. At least 4 riders, coming fast. Back on the horse now, they mounted quickly, Thunder snorting with renewed energy as Zach urged him forward. The terrain was changing, becoming more open as they left the mountains behind. Good for speed, but bad for cover. "There's a trading post about 10 miles ahead," Zach said. "If we can reach it, we might find help." Thunder galloped valiantly, but the sound of pursuit grew steadily louder. Bethany looked back to see dust rising from the desert floor behind them. "They're gaining," Zach urged Thunder to greater speed, but the stallion was tiring after a night of hard riding. The first bullets whistled past them as Kane's men came within range. Ahead, the trading post appeared a collection of adobe buildings surrounded by a wooden fence. Zach made straight for it, praying someone there would help. As they approached, a man emerged from the main building, rifle raised. "Hold it right there, we need help," Zach called out. "Outlaws on our tail." The man squinted at them, then at the approaching riders. His expression hardened as he recognized the pursuit. "Get inside." Now they dismounted and ran through the gate, which the man quickly barred behind them. 3 other men appeared, all armed. "Kane's gang," their rescuer explained to the others. "Been terrorizing settlements up and down the territory." "Name's Samuel Davis," he told Zach and Bethany. "This here's my trading post. Those vermin have robbed me twice this year." The outlaws pulled up about 100 yards out, Kane at their lead. Zach counted 6 men, total half the gang's strength, but still dangerous. "Send out the girl and the man who took her, Davis," Kane shouted. "This ain't your fight." "Looks like I'm making it my fight," Davis called back. "You've robbed your last traitor, Kane," Kane conferred with his men, then turned back. "We've got you outgunned, last chance to do this peaceful." Davis spat on the ground. "I've got 4 rifles and walls, you've got 6 pistols and open ground, you do the arithmetic." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Kane raised his hand and his men opened fire. Bullets thudded into the wooden fence and adobe walls as Zach, Bethany, and the traitors took cover. Davis and his men returned fire methodically, forcing the outlaws to retreat beyond effective range. "They'll try to wait us out," Davis said grimly. "I've sent one of my men out the back way to fetch the cavalry patrol. They've been camped at Eagle Springs, less than 2 hours' ride from here." "Can we hold that long?" Bethany asked, accepting a rifle Davis handed her. "We've got ammunition and water," the traitor replied. "Question is, do they have the patience?" They didn't have to wait long for an answer. Within minutes, smoke began to rise from the south side of the trading post. "They're trying to burn us out," one of the traitors shouted. Zach ran to the south wall, seeing flames beginning to lick at the wooden fence. He grabbed a water barrel and, with help from Davis, managed to douse most of the fire before it spread. Kane's voice carried across the yard. "That was just a taste. Next time we'll burn the whole place down." The standoff continued, with occasional exchanges of gunfire. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive inside the adobe buildings. Bethany helped distribute water while the men maintained their positions at windows and gaps in the fence. "Tell me about Oro Blanco," Davis said during a lull. "Is it true the silver's playing out?" "My father thought so," Bethany replied. "That's why he started gambling more, trying to make up for his failing business." "Your father," Davis said quietly. "What happened to him?" Bethany's face tightened. "Kane killed him, then claimed me as payment for gambling debts." Davis's expression darkened. "That man's been due a reckoning for a long time." Another volley of shots interrupted them, closer this time. Kane's men were creeping forward, using the sparse desert vegetation for cover. "They're getting bolder," Zach observed. "Must be running out of patience." A sudden commotion from outside drew their attention. Through a window, Zach spotted Eddie Meeks being dragged forward by 2 of Kane's men. "I found him trying to sneak away," one of them shouted. "Says he's got information." Kane strode forward, grabbing Eddie by the collar. Whatever the boy said caused Kane to look sharply toward the trading post. After a brief exchange, Kane drew his gun and shot Eddie point-blank in the chest. Bethany gasped in horror. "He tried to help us escape," she whispered. "That's why Kane killed him." "And if Eddie told him about the cavalry coming, they'll attack now," Zach realized, "before help arrives." He was right. Kane began shouting orders, and his men spread out, preparing for a coordinated assault. "Get ready," Davis called to his men. "They're coming in hard." The attack came from multiple directions at once, 3 men charging the front gate while others attempted to scale the back wall. Gunfire erupted from all sides as the defenders struggled to repel the assault. Zach and Davis held the front, picking off one attacker before he reached the gate. The other 2 took cover behind water troughs just outside the fence, laying down covering fire for their companions. At the rear, one of Kane's men managed to get over the wall before being shot by one of Davis's traitors. Another followed, engaging in hand-to-hand combat with the second traitor. Bethany stationed herself at a side window, rifle ready. When one of Kane's men appeared in her sights trying to reach the front gate, she fired without hesitation. The man fell, clutching his leg. The battle raged for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes. 2 of Kane's men were down, with another wounded. On the defender's side, one of Davis's traitors had taken a bullet to the shoulder but remained in the fight. Kane himself had stayed back, directing his men from relative safety. But as the attack faltered, he grew more desperate. "Burn it," he shouted. "Burn the whole damn place." 2 of his men produced torches and oil, preparing to set the wooden fence ablaze again. Zach aimed carefully and shot one, but the other managed to splash oil across the front gate before retreating. A flaming arrow arced through the air, striking the oil-soaked wood. Flames erupted immediately, threatening to spread to the main building. "The well," Davis shouted. "Form a bucket line." They worked frantically to control the fire, passing buckets from hand to hand while maintaining their defensive positions. The heat became unbearable as the flames grew higher. Then, through the smoke and chaos, came the most beautiful sound Bethany had ever heard: a bugle, sounding the cavalry charge. Over a nearby rise appeared a dozen mounted soldiers, rifles gleaming in the sunlight. Cain's men scattered instantly, running for their horses. Cain himself stood frozen for a moment, then turned to flee. As he mounted his horse, he looked back at the trading post, his eyes finding Bethany through the smoke. The hatred in his gaze sent a chill through her despite the heat. "This isn't over, girl," he shouted before spurring his horse and galloping away. The cavalry split, half pursuing the fleeing outlaws while the rest rode to the trading post. The sergeant dismounted quickly, assessing the situation. "Anyone hurt?" he called. "One wounded, not serious," Davis replied, directing men to continue fighting the fire. "You're a welcome sight, Sergeant." "Got your man's message," the sergeant said. "Been trying to catch Cain for months. With luck, we'll run down at least some of them." The fire was eventually extinguished, leaving the front gate charred but the rest of the trading post intact. As evening approached, 2 cavalry troopers returned, leading 3 captured outlaws. Cain himself had escaped along with 2 others. "We'll get him," the sergeant assured them. Cain's running out of places to hide. That night, Bethany sat with Zach on the trading post's porch, watching the stars appear one by one. Davis had given them a room to rest, insisting they stay until the cavalry could escort them safely back to Oro Blanco. "What will you do now?" Zach asked quietly. "Your father's gone, the saloon likely seized by creditors." Bethany sighed, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I don't know, start over somewhere, I suppose. Or stay," Zach suggested, his voice hesitant. "Oro Blanco's still home despite everything." "Why would I stay?" she asked, though something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Zach turned to face her, his expression visible in the soft lantern light spilling from the trading post windows. "Because I'll be there, and I think we have something worth building on." Bethany smiled, the first genuine smile since her world had collapsed. "You rode through the night to save me, risked everything." "And I'd do it again," he said simply. She leaned forward, resting her head against his shoulder. "Then I guess I'm staying." 2 weeks later, they returned to Oro Blanco under cavalry escort. The town was much as they had left it, though the saloon remained closed, a notice of foreclosure posted on its doors. Miller met them as they rode in, his relief evident. "Thought you might be dead," he said gruffly to Zach. "Good to see I was wrong." News of their return spread quickly. By evening, a small crowd had gathered at Miller's forge to hear their story. Among them was the town banker, Harold Walsh. After the others had dispersed, Walsh approached Bethany privately. "Miss Owens, I was sorry to hear about your father. Despite his failings, he was a fixture in this town." "Thank you, Mr. Walsh," Bethany replied cautiously. "I understand the saloon has significant debts against it," Walsh continued, "but the building itself has value. With the right management, it could be profitable again." Bethany studied him suspiciously. "What are you suggesting?" "A partnership," Walsh explained. "The bank provides capital to clear the debts and renovate. You provide the management. We split the profits until the investment is repaid, then the business becomes yours entirely." "Why would you offer this?" she asked. Walsh glanced toward Zach, who was speaking with Miller nearby. "Because that young man risked everything to bring you back, shows character. And this town needs characters like that to survive." Bethany considered the offer carefully. "I'd want everything in writing, and I choose my own staff." Walsh nodded. "Of course, shall we shake on it?" 1 month later, the Oro Blanco saloon reopened its doors under new management. Bethany had transformed it from a gambling den into a respectable establishment, serving food and drink to miners, cowboys, and travelers alike. Zach had taken charge of security, ensuring that the trouble that had plagued her father's business remained firmly in the past. Word came that the cavalry had captured the remaining members of Kane's gang in Sonora. Kane himself had been killed resisting arrest, shot by a young lieutenant who had grown up in one of the towns the gang had terrorized. On a warm evening 6 months after their return, Zach found Bethany on the saloon's balcony, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "Business looks good," he said, joining her at the railing. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Walsh says we'll clear the debt within a year at this rate." Zach nodded, seeming distracted. "I've been thinking about the future." "Oh," Bethany turned to him, curious. "I bought land today," he said, a nervous edge to his voice. 10 acres outside town with water rights, good grazing land. "Planning to raise horses?" "Eventually." He took her hand. "But first I thought I might build a house, something solid with room to grow into." Bethany's heart quickened. "That sounds ambitious for a bachelor." "That's just it," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I'm hoping not to be a bachelor much longer." He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring set with a small sapphire. "It's not fancy, it's perfect," she interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. "Bethany Owens, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes." They married 2 weeks later in Oro Blanco's small church, with Miller giving the bride away and the entire town turning out to celebrate. The cavalry sergeant who had helped rescue them even rode in for the occasion, bringing news that the Arizona Territory governor had issued a special commendation for Zach's bravery. As they danced at their wedding celebration, held in the very saloon where their story had begun, Bethany leaned close to her new husband's ear. "I never thanked you properly," she whispered. "For what?" Zach asked, holding her closer. "For riding through the night to bring me home." Zach smiled, spinning her gently across the floor. "It wasn't just about bringing you back," he said. "It was about bringing us both home to where we belong." 5 years later, the Jackson Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory. Zach's breeding program had produced horses sought after throughout the Southwest, while Bethany continued to manage the saloon in town, now completely her own. Their home, a sturdy adobe structure with wide porches and large windows, stood on a rise overlooking Oro Blanco. On its front porch, Bethany sat in a rocking chair, watching their 3-year-old son Thomas playing with wooden horses his father had carved. Inside, their infant daughter Eleanor slept peacefully in her cradle, born just 2 months earlier. Zach emerged from the house carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "The Millers are coming for supper," he said, handing her a glass and sitting in the adjacent rocker. "Sarah's bringing that apple pie you like." Bethany smiled, reaching for his hand. "Perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son's imagination transform the dusty yard into wild adventures with his toy horses. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, turning the modest ranch into something magical. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Bethany asked quietly. "If you hadn't come after me that night," Zach squeezed her hand. "I try not to. Some paths are too dark to contemplate." "I'm glad you were brave enough to find me," she said. "Brave enough to believe we deserved this life together." "Not brave," Zach corrected gently. "Just couldn't imagine a world without you in it." Little Thomas looked up from his play, grinning at his parents with Bethany's blue eyes and Zach's determined chin. "Daddy, can we ride to the creek tomorrow?" "Of course, partner," Zach replied. "First light." As their son returned to his games, Bethany leaned her head against Zach's shoulder, content in the knowledge that some journeys, no matter how dangerous, lead exactly where they are meant to home, to the people who make life worth the ride.